From his working class roots in Burnaby and East Vancouver to becoming an alderman, an MLA, and then a super minister and later a super bureaucrat as head of ICBC, Bob Williams has led a life full of achievement, many of which we now take for granted. Now, at the age of 89, he's just finished committing his remarkable story to paper in his new autobiography, Using Power Well, Bob Williams and the Making of British Columbia. Welcome to the City News Bookshelf, Bob.
Thanks very much. It's a pleasure.
First off, it seems to me the book is informed by a sense of being the last man standing from a remarkable era of BC politics. Is that kind of what made you write the book?
Yeah, I did feel this story hadn't been fully told. The little group that founded that government in 72, 75 under Dave Barrett was an extraordinary gang of folks, and it was a joyous place to work and create new policy for the province. So yeah, it was a great time.
As someone put it to you, you've got to write, Bob, or they'll steal it from you.
It's true, you know, the people that write the history own it. So I'm developing a bit of ownership, a little late, but better late than never.
Better late than never, indeed. Your first job out of high school was at Vancouver City Hall. As you say in the book, you didn't start at the bottom, you started below the bottom. In the
yeah, I worked in the sewer department, so how much lower can you get? But it was a wonderful, I hadn't realized how politically oriented I was. And so I was at the counter in the sewer department on the 5th floor at City Hall and watched people coming and going. And I got to sense the power structure and how it all worked. The city engineer, after all, had his own elevator, and he was the biggest guy in the building as well physically. So you start developing the patterns, and everybody jumped when the city engineer said jump. But the only ones that didn't were two of the big corporations, private corporations, the CPR and the old BC Electric, who were there before transit. So yeah, it was a great watching spot. And getting to know the people in City Hall, so that later on, when I became an alderman, I was able to check with my old buddies who were now in the middle or upper levels of city bureaucracy, and so I could find out when anybody was lying, which is a wonderful spot to be.
So from there, your resume includes stops at the Lower Mainland Regional Planning Board, and then the Corporation of Delta, where you were its first planner. And already, as the book lays out, or as you lay out in the book, you're fighting the good fight to preserve farmland from development, which was an issue back then, of course, as well.
Yeah, and it was a hell of a fight because there was so much money to be made. It used to take an hour and a half via the Patullo Bridge and back down the river to get to Ladner. And then all of a sudden, with the tunnel, it was, half an hour. And that meant land values just went through the roof. And so it was a matter of cutting back on some of the stuff they've done and preserving what was there. And as a result, one of the nicest places in the valley is Ladner. It's totally protected by this farmland and the river. And I actually recently bought a place there myself because I like it so much.
Your first foray into elected office was on Vancouver City Council. This is the time of Gerald Sutton Brown and urban renewal. How important was it at that time to have representation at council from East Vancouver?
Yeah, there'd been no representation from East Van since the 30s. And I ran a separate campaign on the east side saying, vote for your side. And on the west side, I said, vote for young planner. And both the slogans worked. And nobody expected it, but it was my first run. And I got elected to council. And it was a great, fun experience. I really liked all of them, even the ones that were kind of questionable characters, because it was a round table, and you could make arguments. And some of the ultra right wingers on council couldn't believe what I was able to pull off. I mean, believe it or not, tenants couldn't run for public office. in those days. And I got a motion through council and through the legislature so that, you know, renters could run to be a city councillor. It's, you know, it's hard to believe when, you know, so many rights are well established, but I'm old enough to know that there was another time.
And from there, you join a new generation of legislators in the BC election of 1966. What was the biggest difference or culture shock for you between civic politics in Vancouver and going up to the big leagues in the Ledge?
Just office conditions, for example. There were a dozen of us and we were in one room. And so we had a big table in the middle and we separated it with law books to create a little bit of privacy at our own desk. And that was it. I decided that I wasn't going to accept that kind of nonsense. And W.A.C. Bennett, the premier, walked by our office on his way to the legislature every day. So I said, hey, I'm not going to take this. And they said, hey, young pup, get used to it. It's what we get. And so I said, no, I'm moving my office out in the corridor. The hell with this. So I moved to books and table and secretary, telephone. And the old man almost tripped over my desk as he went to the legislature. We got new offices right away. So that was a sign of times changing. But he was an incredibly able politician for his time. And Dave Barrett and I both learned a hell of a lot from him. He ran the province on his own essentially on his own for 20 years. And he didn't need bureaucrats. Thank you very much. And as a result, he ended up taking over the BC Electric and creating BC ferries and creating the highway system we have. So extraordinary talent, but a very tough-minded. He was a mean SOB with us. It was a pure war in the legislature.
Well, then in 1972, the NDP forms government for the first time, ending the era of the Bennett Socreds, the WAC Bennett Socreds. As you write in the book, our freedom to innovate was the secret sauce that set us apart. No government since, nor any academic historian has understood that. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I don't think any of the political scientists have figured it out, nor do I think they've been very interested. I've never been interviewed, given my history, for example. You're one of the few gutsy interviewers. But at any rate, I think the real secret was we were a joyous lot that really got along with one another. And we didn't worry about turf. We were just determined to get things done. And we had a ton of ideas. And Glenn Clark, as I see recently, has said I was an idea man that just never stopped having ideas. And I think that's true. And so we did, at first, the bureaucracy was not that impressive. And I would literally almost have to scream after meeting a deputy minister after he left the office just to let it out, because they weren't all that capable. Mainly mail clerks that had come in early and then got up to be deputy ministers. So I finally realized after, fortunately, just a few months, that was a hell of an advantage. I didn't need them at all. I simply didn't need them at all. And that was a time when we were graduating a lot of planners. I was a young Canadian planner and we were fairly rare birds, and I had a good range of friends and colleagues that were graduating around the same time. So we were able to bring in new talent that ready to really hit the ground running. And one of my deputies was like that. You could hand him any assignment and it would be right back within the week and say, there it is. Whereas one of the older civil servants, I'd asked him to check out the Olympics, which was being considered in Colorado at the time. He got back to me afterwards and it was sloppy information. And I said, who the hell have you talked to? This isn't all that great. And he said, oh my God. I said, didn't you talk to anybody in Colorado? And he said, oh, well, WAC Bennett wouldn't let anybody at my level phone outside the province. So, he was controlling the telephone calls and the long distance calls. So it paid off in some ways, I guess, but not for the big issues. And then when I subsequently told that to the bureaucrat who headed up the Parks branch, he said, I don't remember that. And so, memory fades. And that's why I guess I, several years ago, started to write this. And finally, I've been fortunate enough to live long enough that it's finally complete. Although the editor and I are having a few arguments about minor details, but I bow to his ability.
Now, you were talking about ideas, innovations. Which ones are you most proud of? I imagine the agricultural land reserve is pretty near the top of the list.
Yeah, and it was initiated by Dave Barrett, or pardon me, Dave Stubich, who was Minister of Agriculture. They hadn't, in that bureaucracy, figured out how much it would cost to pay each of the farmers for taking away that designation. But I'd been out in Delta and I could see what the differences were. And as a result, we did not compensate the farmers for the new designation in the ALR. But I did say to Dave Stupich, look, if you're looking for insurance for the farmers or other help, I'm for it, but I'm not ready to pay them for zoning rights that they don't really have. So that was a big argument right at the beginning. And fortunately, myself and Norman Pearson, my assistant, won that argument. And, it's one of the great successes of that administration. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And it's a pleasure to go out in the valley now and see all the housing out in Abbotsford up on the mountain and nothing in the farmland below. It's pretty impressive.
Now, as a North Shore resident, it seems I have you to thank for the Seabus and Lonsdale Quay, as those came together very much hand in hand. What was the story there?
Wow, you've read the book well. Well, the story was again. Well, there was a naval architect in Victoria that came into my office one day, and my secretary kept the door open often for anybody, and he had this plan for a Seabus, and he said he thought that could, alleviate the idea of a new bridge across the inlet. And so I passed him on to Jim Lorimer, the Minister for Transit, and he was hired. And in no time, we had Seabus running. And it's been a great achievement. But it also meant we had to look at the North Shore. And so I ended up acquiring quite a bit of the waterfront right at Lonsdale. And as a result, ICBC's there. And now there's a great art gallery there by Michael Adain, one of our great philanthropists, and his company. And now I think we have to just move ICBC out and complete the job. It's just a big kind of lump that's in the way right now. Well, but that's another argument.
Well, yeah, I wanted to get to that too, because in the book you talk about wanting ICBC headquartered in Kamloops and not
originally.
Yeah, so you lost that argument though.
I'm afraid I did, and it was when I took vacation, and Dennis Koch, the MLA for New West, got it relocated, and now it's just Douglas College. The site was actually acquired, but we'd carried out a study, and we thought the big trick would be to something in the interior, and Kamloops is suffered unfairly against Kelowna. It's really should be the dominant city of the southern interior. But because the Bennett family has owned Kelowna for generations, most everything has gone there, including the highway system. So that's still a battle to be fought. And I think in the end, it might make sense to have a crown in Kamloops at the very least.
Well, the BC Lottery Corporation ended up getting headquartered in Kamloops.
Well, that's true. That's true. In the case of ICBC now, I'd move it to Surrey City Centre. The development we got going with SFU and Andrew Petter has created a new center. The Lower Mainland here has always been binodal, and initially it was with the interurban streetcar system. so that New West was the big city and Vancouver was. But since then, the real population is down Surrey and in the south of the river. And so for kids growing up, it's a great center for children. And now the old Wally is Surrey City Center, and gives kids the whole idea of a different kind of future, a different kind of career. It's going to be a medical center and God knows what else, and probably with other crown corporations. And it too is a great success. So, you know, the interesting thing is that when we had the Olympics, the centers that there were centers that I had something to do with. Saving Whistler with Al Rain was the big thing that created the modern Whistler. And then our own Robson Square in Vancouver, and then Surrey City Centre. And that's where all the action happened during the Olympics. And it's something that makes me feel quite proud. But one of the little things that I did that I'm really proud of is street trees on the east side of Vancouver. When I was on city council, in those days, Little Mountain wasn't really forested. You could look out over the whole city, and tells you how old I am. And I looked out on the east side and saw that no greenery. On the west side, it was all trees. And now they actually study canopies over cities and stuff like that. But in those days, they didn't. So I knew that it was just, I was from the east side and they didn't care about us too much up at City Hall. And so I talked to a wonderful colleague, Tom McDonald, and said, Tom, do you realize how bad it is? And he says, don't you know the story behind it? I said, no. And he said, well, you know, West Point Grey, which was a separate municipality, had a socialist who was in charge of their planning commission. And he was the guy that was in charge of the arboretum and stuff, the trees in the boulevards at UBC. And he got them to put in the boulevard trees. And that's why it all happened. And so I cracked the whip and privately met with the Parks branch who managed that stuff and said, look, do you want trouble in public or are you going to go and do it? And they said, we're going to do it. And so now one of the streets that was initially treed was William Street between Renfrew and Nanaimo. It's 100-foot right of way. And now in the spring, I go out there and there's dogwood trees for a mile in each direction. Just gorgeous. And that gives me one of the great pleasures, actually.
Going over your life's work in government, out of government, what lessons can we take away?
Oh, boy. Well, you have to have an imagination. You know, there's a great American writer who argues that the lack of imagination and accepting the corporate world and the corporate world's view of most everything is a terrible mistake. And I certainly found that to be the case. And since I've got an active imagination, I just let myself go. And it was a joyous group that was ready to really try anything. And we'd already had a history of many members who had not been in power. So we had a residue and a catalog of things to look at. And so we had a great time, actually. Didn't get elected, and had we had 2 terms, it would have been profound, but what the heck.
As you write, we were government for only about 38 months. They were the most exhilarating, exhausting years of my life. What do you have to say about the current NDP government in power right now?
Oh boy. I think they're really quite good, and they've not been dealt the best cards in the deck, but they've got a full load to face right now. I hadn't realized that some of the health problems were as serious as they are. And for the NDP, that's not acceptable. We're known for our health programs historically. But in addition, we've not taken on the question of the big forest issues and saving the ancient forests. And we're lucky to have the forest ecologist, Suzanne Simard at UBC now, who's pioneered the work of how how the microcosms in the underground work, and found out that many of our forest policies are actually wrong. When she was young and was questioned about it, she was asked, well, what about existing policy? And she said naively, they might as well be painting rocks, which tells you a hell of a lot of what's missing in our forest programs. But if we do work it out with the Indigenous people and decentralize on a regional basis, we can still save it. And I hope some of my friends there will get on with that.
Bringing it back to the title of the book, if politics is the art of the possible, what do we mean when we say the job of the politician is using power well?
Oh, gee, it's being freed to use the best of your own ability as you apply yourself to the problems. Everything is so centralized now and so bureaucratized now and financialized now that many people don't think that that leaves enough space to be truly creative. But you have to get out there in the regions, and I've been lucky to have spent some time in the Kootenays and elsewhere, and I've fallen in love with the Kootenays. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous region, and it's partly why we created the Columbia Basin Trust, to give them more power and authority relative to that river, which was mainly serving us down on the coast. And so we created the Columbia Basin Trust and empowered the people and provided rent and revenue from the river for them. And it's been immensely beneficial for the Kootenays. And an old professor of mine had been in charge of compensation for the people in the Kootenays, and he did as best he could. But he said to me as a student, if we've really taken away their lifestyle in that basin. The whole river has been flooded, the Arrow Lakes and so on. But Bob, if you can later on in your work do something to compensate them again in terms of those losses, that would be great. And we did, and it's working well.
And finally, Bob, what do you hope the reader gets out of the book?
Oh, wow. Well, a real appreciation for the province and the diversity of the province, and how much we actually can do if we just free ourselves and understand and talk to one another.
The name of the book is Using Power Well, Bob Williams and the Making of British Columbia. It's available from Nightwood Editions. My thanks to Bob Williams.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.